Good morning. It's good to be here. I don't think Robin knew what she was getting into, and she invited me unheard to come over here and preach. This morning I want to talk about relationships. Not so much the relationships that we have among ourselves, although that's sort of a part of it. But I want to talk about the relationship that we have to this planet, to the earth, our home. I think in many ways we just take it for granted that we're sort of related to. We're here, right? We're on it. That's it. We don't think about how we relate to it. And yet other cultures relate to it in very different ways from the way that we do. And I suspect there's a good deal we can learn from other cultures on how we should be relating to this planet, to the earth, to our home. Several years ago, I was pastor of a church, and I had a young woman in the church who was a professional dancer. And she had gone to Senegal to study West African dance. While she was there, she made some very good friends, and she tells the story that one afternoon she had invited them to come to her bungalow for afternoon tea. And so in the backyard, she set up a table and some chairs and some goodies. I don't know what Senegalese goodies are like, but she had the goodies on the table. And her friends were there, and they were talking and laughing and sharing. And suddenly she heard the kettle on the stove whistling. The boiling water was ready to make the tea. So she went into the bungalow, and she got the kettle, and she put it on a tray, and she began to walk across the backyard, and suddenly she stumbled, and the tray tipped, and the kettle fell off, and all of the boiling hot water landed right in the middle of the backyard in the grass. Well, her friends rushed right over to see if she were hurt, and what she said was later, the only thing hurt was my pride. I'm a dancer. I'm not supposed to trip in my backyard. But then her friends did something that surprised her. They gathered around this big puddle of boiling water that was still steaming. They held hands, and very quietly they began to pray together in their native language. And when they had finished their prayer, they just stood there silently. She went over to them and said, What is this about? What are you doing? And she said, they looked at me as if I was a little child that I didn't understand. And finally, one of them said, why, we've wounded Mother Earth, and we're asking for her forgiveness. We've wounded Mother Earth, and we're asking for her forgiveness, relating to this planet, this earth, this home of ours, as their mother. It's not too far-fetched, really, is it? It's from the earth that we are born. It's the earth that sustains us in our lives, and it is the earth to which we will go, finally. And we have wounded her. One of my favorite hobbies is fly fishing. I love to go up to northern Maine to fish, and it's one of the joys. I get to go up once and sometimes even twice during the spring and generally in the fall. There's nothing like being up in the wilderness, beautiful, pristine wilderness with lakes and ponds and brooks and rivers. And one of the reasons I really love to go up there is that the fish are what I like to call naive, if you get my meaning. They don't see many fishermen throwing flies at them. The land up there is owned mostly by lumber companies, paper companies. I've been out on some of those ponds, those beautiful ponds, on a day very much like today, when the leaves are turning reds and golds, and yellows, and the birch trees are sparkling white, and the evergreens are still there, absolutely magnificent. And you sit there in the canoe and you look at the mountains around you, and you see the blue sky, and you see the clouds, and the angle of the sun. And as you look around the periphery and look, and suddenly, there it is. It's the side of the mountain that's been clear-cut by the lumber companies. Not a tree standing. All that's left is the dirt, some rocks, maybe a little bit of scrub growth, and that's it. In the midst of that beauty, we wounded Mother Earth. Some of you know a good deal more than I do about things like strip mining. You know what strip mining is? It used to be when we wanted to get the minerals out of the earth, we'd dig a hole. And we'd go down and dig it and send the stuff up, and we'd refine it and do what we had to do, whether it was coal or whether it was metals or whatever. But we found a way now that is much more efficient and can really make us a lot more money, and that is, instead of digging into the mountain, tearing down the mountain. And you see the remnants of that in Wyoming, Idaho, places like that, where they have earth-moving machines that are as big as this building. It will go and simply take the top off the mountain. And then they have earth movers that go around and dig and put whatever is inside on the back of huge trucks. And they cart it off, take what they want, and then dump the refuse somewhere. Some of these strip mines are hundreds and hundreds of yards across and equally deep. And the scars are so deep that they are visible from outer space. We've wounded Mother Earth. Well, I do a lot of shopping in the supermarkets. I'm looking at my wife, and she has just had a... I don't do a lot of shopping in the supermarkets. But occasionally I go down the aisle where they're selling household cleaning products. And I noticed that on the bottom shelf, because they don't sell very much, there's a line of household cleaning products called Seventh Generation. You ever seen them? Seventh Generation products are reputed to be environmentally friendly, organic, all of that sort of thing so that they don't destroy nature. Now, the name Seventh Generation comes from our Native Americans, right? You know that? That it is said that before us Europeans came to what is now called North America, the native tribes in this part of North America, that is eastern Canada, New England, and through New York into the Midwest, they had a tradition that when they were going to make important decisions for the tribe, they would come together. Decisions like if the chief died and they needed a new chief or a new holy man, or if they were going to make war or sue for peace, or things of that import. They would come together and they would try to make their decision, but the number one question that was always on their mind when they made the decision was, how will the decision that we make today affect our children's 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 children to the seventh generation? You see, they understood themselves as simply stewards of this gift, the earth, the planet, their home. And that they had received this gift from their ancestors generations before, and they were going to pass it on to their children's 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 generations after. And that was their task, to care for this earth, for their home. 7 generations. I'm trying to think now, in our culture, when we think of the future, other than when we're watching science fiction, how far do we plan in the future? What do we think about we're handing on to our children's 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 children? Do we ever think about it? I worked for about 9 years as a management consultant working with large corporations. And I noticed most corporations had a little group that they thought their job was to think about the future. And they were so respected in the organization that they called this little group the Skunk Works. Literally, the Skunk Works. And they would come up with all kinds of ideas, but when the rubber hit the road, what was the future for the senior management team of most of those companies? 90 days. Because that's when they had to file reports on their profitability. And you see, the one thing that was important was stock price and profit. And whatever it took to get those, they would take that step. And so they might manufacture something, but would they ask the question of how is what we're manufacturing going to affect our children's children's children? How is the way that we manufacture it going to affect our children's children's children? When we're done with it, how we dispose of it, how will that affect our children's children's children's? None of those questions were being asked. Now, it's easy to blame corporations. But how many of us ask those questions? How many of us opt for convenience? How many of us opt for the cheapest possible? How many of us think that the decisions we make, simple decisions sometimes, and then say, I wonder how this is going to affect my grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren? You see, their relationship to the earth, to their home it's a gift. And it is up to us to hand the gift on in as fine a condition as we received it. How do we relate to this planet? Some of you are old enough. It's good to look around. I see some people almost as old as I am. You remember the Apollo mission? We just celebrated the 50th anniversary of Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon. To me, the most powerful part of that Apollo mission was the photograph they sent back of Earthrise. Do you remember that picture? That was a picture so powerful. It was a picture from outer space of this planet, which appeared as a tiny marble in the blackness of infinity. A tiny marble of beautiful blues and whites and greens, just floating in the middle of the eternal darkness. And when we looked at that picture, what did we feel? We felt how fragile, how beautiful this thing is. I think that one of the important things that we have to realize is how we relate to this planet has a lot to do with how we think about the most fundamental questions of life. Questions like, why is there something instead of nothing? How did we get here? Where are we headed? In the West African culture, they have many beautiful stories that describe that with such awe and such reverence and such a sense of beauty and such a sense of needing to pay back, needing to care for. Native American, same thing in their culture. The sense of thankfulness, of having received this enormous gift and now needing to care for it. Well, the story that our culture, our scientific techno-culture, and I'm not picking on scientists and technologists, but the story that we tell is called the Big Bang Theory, right? Not the TV show, but the theory. And the theory, it's beyond my comprehension, but essentially says that a bazillion, gazillion years ago, something happened. An explosion. And suddenly atoms were spewing out and creating molecules that were creating stuff and creating planets and creating galaxies. And I don't have a clue what that means. All I know is, doesn't it sort of lack the reverence of the other stories? But there is another story in our culture about those questions, how things came to be. And it's the story we find in our Bible, the book of Genesis. Now, that story in the first chapter of Genesis is really, it's one of those stories that to me, and I don't know, some people will agree or disagree, it's one of those stories that to me may not have any facts, but it has truth. Because it's trying to tell us how to relate to this gift. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and a void, and suddenly, ruach is the Hebrew word. It can be wind, it can be spirit, it can be breath, but somehow ruach swept across the face of the deep. And the process began. There was light and there was dark, and there was a day. And there was water and there was land, and there was this planet which could support life. And there were animals and there were vegetables which could create an ecosystem where all things could come together. 6 days it took. And you know, there's an interesting thing. I think there are two things I just want to bring up about that story. Two of what I call, in my own mind, the truths. The first is that story begins with spirit. There was nothing. And out of the spirit came something. Now, if we want to hold on to that truth for just a minute, what does it say to us? Maybe it says something like this to us. Maybe it says that we are all born of the Spirit, you and I. But not just you and I, maybe the animals are born of the Spirit too, and maybe the trees, and maybe all the vegetables, and maybe the earth, and maybe the sky, and maybe the sea, and maybe the brooks, and maybe the lakes. Maybe all that is born of the Spirit. And if we believe that, then surely we can't believe that we have the right to destroy, to scar, to tear apart, to create refuse. You know, we create so much rubbish that we're actually looking at how to get rid of it and thinking of sending it to the moon. You've heard that, right? We have no place to put it anymore. We're so wasteful of all the good things that we have received that we don't have any place to put the rubbish. All things are made of spirit. The Spirit came first, and then the rest of it. And you and I are part of that. How can we, if we're part of the Spirit, destroy our mother? The second thing in that story that I really like is, did you notice in my quick retelling that one of the things that, one of the conventions, one of the things that they do in that story, it's something that happens in Hebrew poetry a lot. They take two things that seem to be opposite or very different, and they say light and dark. And what happens? You harmonize them and create day and night. You take earth and sea, and what happens? You harmonize them and you create the environment for life. That story is really about harmony, isn't it? All things that are part of this world need to live in harmony, and when one part goes out of kilter, the rest suffer. And isn't that what's happened? Isn't that what has happened? No more sense of reverence, and beyond that, we've broken the harmony. And so here we are. That was a downer, wasn't it? But there's hope. There is hope. And you know what the hope is? You and I. We're the hope. We have to shift the way we relate to this planet. We can't think of it anymore as just a bunch of natural resources that we have every right to rip, slash, and tear and use for our convenience. We have to shift that and see the wonder that Wendell Berry talks about, the wonder and the awe of this whole thing as it fits together and creates life. If we lose the sense of wonder and awe, we're lost. But you and I, as people of faith, are the ones who need to keep that story alive. We are the ones that need to shift the way that our neighbors and our friends and our family and our world thinks about this planet, this earth, our home. You and I need to begin to do, and some of us maybe have, the little things. Plastic bags, straws, all that. Cut down the junk. Cut down the number of rides we take. We can all do at least a little bit, but we have to do the big thing too. We have to confront those who control our economy. We have to confront those who are in positions of economic power and say, stop. Stop! We won't buy your junk anymore. We'd rather have some inconvenience than to have our great-great-grandchildren end up with no world at all. And we have to have the courage to confront our political leaders. It actually doesn't make any difference now what party, because neither one has done anything, have they? I love that little Swedish girl, Greta. She goes before the UN speaking to all the leaders of the world, and she says, "How dare you? How dare you?" You and I have to stand up and be counted. We have to say the same thing. How dare you? Because simply put, we've wounded Mother Earth. And she needs to forgive us. We've taken this gift and squandered it so that our children and their children may very well end up with nothing. We have forgotten that fragile little marble floating in space. Thought that we could do anything we wanted, but we broke the harmony. We lost the spirit. And so as we come to this time in our history, the question we have to answer is, are we ready to seek forgiveness and to change how we relate to our mother? Amen.